Welcome back. I'm Bill Jasper, and we're continuing our conversation with Christian Gomez, contributor to The New American, and his coverage of the USMCA. So, Christian, the new agreement proposed, the USMCA, also talks about environment and sustainable development, that watchword in all United Nations agreements. What does the USMCA say about these things?
That's a good point. As I mentioned in the previous other video, one of the new chapters in the USMCA that we didn't see in NAFTA was the environment chapter, and this chapter has a lot to say about sustainable development. For example, right in the second page of chapter 24, it says the parties, referring to the U.S., Canada, and Mexico, recognize that a healthy environment is an integral element of sustainable development and recognize the contribution that trade makes to sustainable development. So it's setting the stage right away that sustainable development is essential in order to have trade all of a sudden. It wasn't part of NAFTA. It's not part of other trade agreements, but now we can't have trade between these other countries unless we pursue sustainable development. So when you go further in chapter 24, we see an identical provision that's also found in the TPP, actually, almost the same exact wording, and that's in Article 24.15 under Trade and Biodiversity, which in the TPP is actually Article 20, Trade and Biodiversity, same title.
By the way, for those who aren't familiar with it, the TPP is the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which candidate and President Trump denounced as being unacceptable.
That's right. And how the TPP mentions sustainable development, so does the USMCA. The USMCA says about that, the parties recognize the importance of conservation and sustainable use of biological diversity, as well as the ecosystem services it provides, and their key role in achieving sustainable development. Those exact words were also found in the TPP. Then later on, we see in the same environment chapter that the agreement subordinates the United States to UN international authority at various conventions and treaties. For example, in Article 24.18, under Sustainable Fisheries Management, it says in point 3, each party shall base its fisheries management system on the best scientific evidence available and on internationally recognized best practices for fisheries management and conservation as reflected in the relevant provisions of international instruments aimed at ensuring the sustainable use and conservation of marine species. Now, what's interesting is that paragraph is kind of innocuous sounding until you see that there's a little footnote where they define what they meant by international instruments. The footnote reads right below it, actually, these instruments include, among others, so it's not just these are just some of them, as they may apply, then it mentions the United Nations Convention on Law of the Seas, so the Law of the Sea Treaty, we're going to abide by that under the USMCA, which the U.S. Senate has not ratified, so we're going to act as though we have ratified it through the USMCA. We're also going to abide by the United Nations Agreement for the implementation of the provisions of the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Seas of December 1982 relating to the conservation and management of stranded fish stocks and highly migratory fish stocks. So another addition to the previous Law of the Sea Treaty. Also the FAO Code of Conduct for Responsible Fisheries, the 1993 FAO Agreement to promote compliance with international conservation management measures by fisheries vessels on the high seas, and the 2001 FAO International Plan of Action to Prevent, Deter, and Eliminate Illegal, Unreported, and Unregulated.
The FAO, by the way, being the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization. So again, these are more ties to the United Nations.
More ties and submission to various bodies of the United Nations. That's correct. And there's references to other UN conventions and treaties sprinkled throughout, that one part that I quoted from had so many just contained in one spot. It's just jaw-dropping. And of course it said among others. So this is we're just listing a few of the key important ones here, but there's others you have to abide by as well.
Right, and it's very important, you pointed out the sustainable development there. For folks that aren't familiar with sustainable development, you need to go online and to our thenewamerican.com and read about sustainable development. And that all, whenever we have this in an agreement, then that takes us back to United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And then you find out what those goals are, and that means that everything has to be subordinate to the United Nations SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, all reflecting various so-called environmental claims on our national sovereignty.
That's right. Essentially, for all those out there that are familiar with Agenda 21 or its new name now, Agenda 2030, this new USMCA subordinates us to continuing to follow those UN mandates.
Well, I'm sure as you delve into this further, you're going to find many other things that are of concern as well. So we're glad you're keeping on top of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we'll be back to look at more of it. Thank you, and join us again. Keep watching us online at thenewamerican.com.